Negotiations haven't even started, yet military actions are already underway. As talks between Washington and Tehran were set to take place on Friday, an Iranian drone headed towards an American warship. Almost simultaneously, armed speedboats harassed an American-flagged tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. Officially, this is a week for diplomacy. In reality, these are high-risk maneuvers in one of the world's most sensitive maritime passages. Therein lies the contradiction. And if you think this is far from home, remember this route controls a vital portion of global oil and gas. And any incident here ripples out across the world. The facts are clear and public, as are the signals. Someone is pushing before the discussion even begins. And when provocations precede a negotiation table, it's never a coincidence. The real question is not what will be said on Friday. It's what is already being played out before the first word is spoken. What is happening now is not an isolated incident. It is a sequence following a pattern both Washington and Tehran know well. On one hand, the United States announces talks while simultaneously deploying a massive military presence in the region. On the other, Iran makes calibrated gestures, not serious enough to spark immediate war, but visible enough to remind everyone it can strike, disrupt, and raise costs. None of this is happening by accident. The available facts don't yet tell the whole story. They only reveal part of it, carefully measured. A drone here, gunboats there, a specific Strait, Hormuz, a precise timing just before Friday. And while attention focuses on the nuclear issue, something bigger is at play, negotiations about what will be discussed and what won't. So ask yourself this. If both sides are already testing their red lines before talking, what are they truly trying to achieve at the negotiating table? And more importantly, what happens if this test fails? Here's the first point that changes how we read the entire sequence. Officially, Washington says it wants to calm things down through negotiation. But on the ground, the numbers tell a different story. The United States has at least 9 warships in the region, dozens of fighter jets, and between 30,000 and 40,000 troops deployed. This is not a symbolic setup. It's a posture of pressure. And this is not my interpretation. It's the message being publicly conveyed. President Trump made it clear to NBC the Iranian supreme leader should be worried about this military buildup. This is no casual statement. It's a signal. And in American strategic parlance, this kind of statement is never made without intention. It's meant to remind everyone that in the event of diplomatic failure, other options are already on the table. But here's the detail that really matters. In these statements, no one talks about American concessions. No one specifies what Washington might be willing to give up if an agreement is reached. Notice this silence. When negotiations begin with public military warnings, it's not just a discussion, it's a test of nerves. And this test has only just begun. This is where the dynamic accelerates, because this face-off is not new, but it's entering a more dangerous phase. We've seen this kind of scenario before, military pressure portrayed as deterrence, talks announced as a way out of a crisis, and in between, a gray zone where anything becomes possible. The difference this time is the regional context. It's already saturated. Recent incidents aren't treated as anomalies. They're absorbed, almost normalized. A drone approaching an American ship, a provocation, armed speedboats harassing an American tanker, intimidation. Yet just a few years ago, even one of these events would have triggered an immediate diplomatic emergency. Now they pile up. And look at how the language is evolving. We're no longer just talking about avoiding escalation. We're talking about options, precedents. Trump refers to past operations like Midnight Hammer portrayed as successes. The message is clear. A limited, swift action without ground troops is still on the table. Gradually, the idea of using force is becoming familiar. This is where something shifts. When the exception becomes routine, miscalculations almost become inevitable. And in this zone, it only takes one wrong step for everything to change. Here's the most revealing detail so far. While the United States publicly talks about a comprehensive deal, behind the scenes, Iran is doing everything to narrow the scope of the discussions. Iranian officials set a clear condition. Friday's talks should only cover the nuclear program, nothing else. Not ballistic missiles, not support for armed groups in the region, not internal repression. One issue, one framework. On the American side, the official response is just as clear. That won't be enough. Trump administration officials explain that for an agreement to be meaningful, it must include certain things. And they warn if the talks go poorly, it could push the president to consider further military action. This is no veiled threat. It's stated explicitly. But here's what changes everything. Despite this hardline stance, reports indicate that Washington has agreed to focus the first round solely on nuclear issues. No immediate denial, no public retraction. Notice the gap between the rhetoric and the outcome. When one side announces red lines, then immediately agrees to move them from the start, it's never neutral. The question now becomes worrying. Who is really winning this first tug of war before the negotiations even begin? At this point, several events unfold too quickly to be ignored. First, an announcement. The talks would be canceled due to a disagreement over their content. Then almost immediately, a reversal. The Iranian foreign minister says the talks will proceed, and this time the framework is clear, nuclear, and nothing else. Soon after, American officials confirm, without fanfare, that this first round will indeed be limited to this issue. The sequence is brief, but it's heavy with meaning. This is not a typical negotiation. It's a crisis managed under pressure. Every announcement is tested. Every retreat is measured. And while public statements give the impression of diplomatic chaos, the process moves forward almost despite itself. This is where the pace becomes dangerous. The faster decisions are made, the less room there is to correct a mistake. Take a second to reflect. If Iran agrees to talks because it feels cornered, and if the United States accepts this limited framework to avoid immediate escalation, what happens if neither side gets what it really wants? The pressure doesn't disappear, it shifts. And when a crisis shifts instead of resolving, it always seeks a new breaking point. This is where the crisis becomes human, concrete, almost tangible. Because while Washington and Tehran adjust their negotiating positions, millions of people live with the immediate consequences of this tension. In the region, American bases are on alert. Soldiers know that even the slightest miscalculation could place them on the front lines. Maritime routes remain open but under constant surveillance. An oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz is not just a ship. It's a global economic artery. And if that artery gets blocked even briefly, the impact doesn't stay local. Energy prices react. Markets tremble. Supply chains tighten. This kind of shock always ends up reaching daily life, far beyond the Middle East. This is where history catches up with you. Even if you're not closely following international politics, look at the other side too. In Iran, the regime emerges weakened from mass protests, violently suppressed, internet shutdowns, thousands dead, tens of thousands arrested. Officially, the streets are calm. Unofficially, nervousness is everywhere, and a nervous regime under external pressure is rarely a predictable player. If this situation seems familiar, say so in the comments. Because this mix of military tension, constrained diplomacy, and economic fear, we've seen it before, and it never disappears on its own. Now, take a step back, not to downplay the gravity, but to understand the mechanism. This kind of crisis isn't just about the decisions of one leader or an isolated incident. It's about a system of incentives. The United States uses military pressure as leverage to force a broader discussion. Iran uses controlled instability as leverage to reduce that discussion to what suits it. Each side acts rationally within its own frame, and that's precisely what makes the situation unstable. Notice how everything hinges on strategic spectacle. Visible ships, public statements, media leaks carefully timed. Nothing is left to chance. The goal isn't just to convince the opponent, but to shape perceptions, those of allies, markets, public opinion. And in this game, fear becomes a currency. Not the fear of total war, but the fear of an uncontrollable escalation. That's why diplomacy continues, even when it seems stalled, because the alternative isn't clear nor manageable. And the more the system rests on this ambiguity, the more each player is tempted to push just a little further, just to see how much the other can take. The problem is that a system based on permanent testing always ends up missing one. In the short term, two trajectories are taking shape, and neither is comfortable. The first is what many hope for without truly believing it. Both sides sit down on Friday, release a cautious statement reaffirming their commitment to diplomacy, and buy some time. No agreement, No breakthrough, just a temporary freeze on escalation. It would be presented as a success because nothing exploded. But this calm would be fragile. Nuclear talks take months, sometimes years, and every week without real progress keeps the military pressure intact. The second trajectory is quieter but riskier. The talks fail to produce even this minimal symbol. The lines remain fuzzy. Provocations return, maybe more discreetly, maybe bolder. A misinterpreted incident, a shot too close, an order given too late. In this scenario, no one announces the rupture. It simply happens. And there's one detail that's particularly worrying. In a previous diplomatic cycle, a deadline had been set. 60 days. On the 61st day, at 3 in the morning, an attack took place. Time here is not neutral. It's running out, and the next deadline may already be forming off camera. There's a central idea that ties all these elements together, and it's easy to miss. This face-off is not just a negotiation over Iran's nuclear program. It's a test of credibility, of patience, and of control. Each side wants to prove it can hold out longer under pressure than the other, without being the one to openly trigger the crisis. And in this game, the appearance of restraint counts as much as actual force. Take the entire sequence from the start: the incidents at sea, the public statements, the tactical retreats, the blurry red lines. Nothing indicates an immediate desire for total war, but everything indicates an acceptance of the risk. And this is precisely where the danger lies. When risk becomes acceptable, it becomes repeatable. And when it becomes repeatable, it inevitably produces an irreversible result. The real lesson of this week isn't what will be announced on Friday. It's what this crisis reveals about how great powers manage instability, by compressing it, not resolving it, by delaying it, not dissipating it. If you want to understand what comes next, you'll need to watch not the signed agreements, but the deadlines set, the silences, and the unspoken gestures. If you want to keep decoding what's unfolding behind official announcements, subscribe. Because this story doesn't end on Friday. It just changes shape.